Welcome back. In our last episode, we explored the idea that not all virtual reality is created equal. That simply having headsets doesn't automatically mean meaningful learning is happening. We talked about the difference between engagement and understanding, between novelty and impact, and why learning design matters more than devices. Today we're going deeper into that conversation because once educators recognize that distinction, the next question naturally follows. If meaningful immersive learning doesn't happen by accident, what makes it happen on purpose? That question is exactly where today's episode begins. Over many years of working alongside schools, universities, and training organizations, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Access to immersive technology has increased rapidly. Headsets are more affordable. Platforms are more available. Interest is higher than ever. But learning outcomes? They've been inconsistent. In many classrooms, immersive experiences are exciting, memorable, and engaging, yet when educators look for clear evidence of learning, it isn't always easy to find. Teachers can see curiosity. They can see motivation. They can see students leaning forward, asking questions, and talking enthusiastically about what they experienced. What they can't always see is measurable understanding. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else in education. Because engagement is visible. Learning evidence often isn't, unless it's intentionally designed to be. This gap between visible innovation and measurable learning is what led to the development of a structured approach known as the Immersive Instructional Inquiry Independent Model, or I4M. And today we're unpacking what that means, why it matters, and how it helps schools move from impressive demonstrations to defensible learning practice. Let's start with a reality that many educators will recognize. In schools around the world, immersive technologies are often introduced with genuine enthusiasm. Leadership teams want to innovate. Teachers want to engage students. Communities want to see future-focused learning environments. Devices are purchased, programs are launched, and students get their first experience stepping into immersive environments. At first, everything looks promising. Students are excited. Teachers are curious. Visitors are impressed. But then questions start to surface. How does this connect to curriculum outcomes? How do we assess learning that happens inside immersive environments? How do we ensure consistency across classrooms? How do we know whether understanding has actually improved? When those questions don't have clear answers, uncertainty grows. Teachers may begin to feel they're experimenting without a map. Leaders may struggle to explain impact beyond anecdotal success stories. And over time, even strong initiatives can lose momentum, not because they lacked value but because they lacked structure. This is one of the most important truths about educational innovation. Tools don't sustain change. Systems do. And that's exactly where I4M comes in. The I4M framework wasn't designed as a product or a platform. It wasn't created to promote a device or a specific technology. Instead, it emerged from observation. From watching what actually happens when immersive learning is introduced into real classrooms with real curriculum demands, real-time constraints, and real accountability expectations. What became clear over time was that immersive learning works best when it's not treated as an isolated event. It works best when it's part of a complete instructional cycle. One that supports learning before, during, and after the immersive experience itself. That cycle is built around 4 interconnected phases: immersive, instructional, inquiry, and independent. Now those words might sound structured. And they are, but they're not rigid. They're not a script teachers must follow step by step. Instead, they act as a shared instructional language. They give educators, leaders, and designers a common way to think about immersive learning, plan for it, and evaluate it. And that shared language is powerful. Because when a whole school understands how immersive learning fits within a learning sequence, confidence increases, consistency improves, and innovation becomes sustainable rather than sporadic. Let's imagine what this looks like in practice. The first phase, immersive, is where students enter a context rather than just hearing about it. Instead of reading a description or looking at a diagram, they step inside an environment. They see relationships, scale, movement, and perspective directly. But here's something important. Within this model, immersion is never about spectacle. It isn't designed to impress students. It isn't designed to entertain them. And it definitely isn't designed to overwhelm them. It's designed to establish context. When every student shares the same immersive experience, discussion becomes grounded in something concrete. Abstract ideas become visible. Spatial relationships become intuitive. Misconceptions surface early. Curiosity becomes observable. For teachers, this phase is incredibly informative. Before any formal instruction begins, they can already see how students are thinking. Who is confident? Who is uncertain? Who is noticing details others missed? Who is forming early hypotheses? In other words, immersion doesn't just support student learning, it informs teacher decision-making. And that's a powerful shift, because instead of guessing what students understand, teachers can see it emerging in real time. But immersion alone isn't enough. This brings us to the instructional phase, the moment where experience connects to academic rigor. One of the biggest misconceptions about immersive learning is the idea that experience replaces teaching. In reality, experience without instruction can leave understanding incomplete or fragile. Students may remember what they saw but struggle to explain why it matters or how it works. Instruction is what transforms experience into knowledge. During this phase, teachers do what they've always done best. They teach. They introduce vocabulary. They clarify concepts. They model thinking. They establish expectations. They connect what students experience to curriculum language and disciplinary understanding. Far from replacing teachers, immersive learning actually amplifies their expertise. It gives them a shared reference point they can use to explain complex ideas more clearly. Instead of describing a system students must imagine, they can refer to one students have already encountered. And this matters enormously for equity. When instruction follows a shared immersive experience, all students begin from the same contextual foundation. That reduces gaps caused by background knowledge, language proficiency, or prior exposure. It gives every learner access to the same conceptual starting point. At a school level, this phase also ensures consistency. Curriculum coverage remains aligned. Expectations stay clear. Cognitive demand is intentional rather than accidental. Instruction becomes the bridge between experience and understanding. Then comes inquiry, the phase where students actively construct meaning. If immersion establishes context and instruction provides clarity, inquiry is where learning truly takes shape. This is where students test ideas, explore possibilities, and examine relationships. They're no longer just observing. They're thinking, deciding, predicting, and evaluating. Inquiry doesn't mean unstructured exploration. In fact, the most effective inquiry is carefully guided. Prompts, challenges, and questions help students focus their thinking while still allowing room for discovery. Teachers shift roles here. Instead of delivering information, they facilitate thinking. They observe how students interact with the environment. They listen to explanations. They notice misconceptions. They ask questions that extend reasoning. This phase generates incredibly rich formative information. Traditional assessments often capture what students can write or say after learning. Inquiry captures how they think during learning. And that insight is invaluable. Because when teachers can see thinking in action, they can respond immediately. They can clarify, extend, challenge, or support, right when it matters most. Inquiry also supports differentiation naturally. Students can engage with the same environment at different levels of complexity without needing completely separate tasks. That keeps learning cohesive while still meeting individual needs. Finally, we arrive at the independent phase, the moment where learning becomes visible, measurable, and transferable. This is where students apply what they've learned without step-by-step guidance. They solve problems. They make decisions. They explain reasoning. They demonstrate understanding in ways that can be assessed and evaluated. This phase answers one of the most common questions educators ask about immersive learning. How do we assess it? The answer is simple but powerful. Assessment isn't added afterward. It's built into the design from the beginning. When immersive learning includes opportunities for independent application, students generate evidence of understanding naturally. Teachers can evaluate that evidence using the same standards they apply to any other learning task. At this point, immersive experience becomes something more than memorable. It becomes measurable. And that distinction is what allows schools to confidently integrate immersive learning into reporting, moderation, and accountability processes. When these four phases work together, something important happens. Immersive learning stops feeling unpredictable. It becomes structured without being restrictive. Teachers know where it fits. Students know what's expected. Leaders know how to evaluate it. Consistency emerges. And consistency is what allows innovation to scale. For teachers, this structure reduces planning uncertainty. Instead of wondering how to use immersive technology effectively, they have a clear framework for sequencing learning. For leaders, it provides a shared lens for quality assurance. For developers, it offers a blueprint aligned with real classroom needs. The strength of the model lies in its balance. It provides consistency while still allowing flexibility. It gives guidance without limiting creativity. There's another dimension to this conversation that often goes unspoken, but is critically important. Risk. Anytime schools adopt new technologies, they're not just making instructional decisions. They're making financial, operational, ethical, and well-being decisions too. Leaders must consider sustainability, procurement, data privacy, staff workload, and student safety. Without structure, those risks increase. With structure, they become manageable. A clear instructional framework helps schools ensure immersive learning is aligned with curriculum, produces observable evidence, and supports complete learning sequences. It helps leaders evaluate return on investment based on learning impact rather than novelty. It reduces reliance on individual champions by creating shared practice. It supports student well-being through intentional design and supervision. And it ensures data use remains purposeful and transparent. In other words, structure turns innovation from a gamble into a responsibility. One of the most powerful outcomes of a shared framework is that responsibility becomes collective. Immersive learning is no longer dependent on one enthusiastic teacher or one motivated department. It becomes part of how the school approaches learning more broadly. And when that happens, something shifts culturally. Immersive learning stops being seen as an experiment. It starts being seen as a practice. That's a profound difference. Because experiments can fade. Practices endure. At its heart, the I4M approach reflects a simple but essential principle. Pedagogy must come before technology. Tools should serve learning, not define it. Exploration should be purposeful. Understanding should be visible. Impact should be measurable. When those principles guide implementation, immersive learning becomes more than engaging. It becomes effective. Teachers gain clarity. Schools gain consistency. Students gain coherence in how they learn and demonstrate understanding. And perhaps most importantly, innovation gains credibility. If there's one message to take away from today's episode, it's this. Immersive technology doesn't transform learning on its own. Thoughtful design does. When immersive experiences are embedded within structured learning cycles, they stop being impressive extras and start becoming integral parts of teaching and learning. They support curiosity, deepen understanding, and make thinking visible in ways that traditional approaches sometimes can't. Not because they're new. Not because they're advanced, but because they're aligned. Alignment, between technology, pedagogy, and purpose, is what turns visible innovation into measurable learning. In our next episode, we'll continue this journey by exploring pedagogical foundations, looking closely at how educators and leaders can evaluate whether software and apps genuinely align with teaching goals, curriculum intent, and learning design, and how to recognize when technology is truly supporting pedagogy rather than distracting from it. Until then, keep observing, keep reflecting, and keep thinking like an innovative teacher. Thanks for listening.